Just what is the spiritual importance of that passage in the scriptures which is called the Olivet Discourse, which we find in Matthew 24 and 25, Mark 13, Luke 21. This video is meant to be an introduction and an overview, so we have the basis to move on from there, and we're going to do a series on the Olivet Discourse. Okay, just some background on the Olivet Discourse. It's a very famous discourse about prophecy. Jesus is on the Mount of Olives, that's why it's called the Olivet Discourse. It's actually, besides the book of Revelation, it's the most extensive prophecy that we find in the New Testament. And primarily this prophecy surrounds itself about Jesus mentioning that there's going to be a destruction of the temple buildings in Jerusalem. Jesus says that not one stone will be left upon another of these temple buildings. And of course, the disciples are very curious about what he said. And he said, well, when will these things be? And what sign will be of your second coming? The return of Jesus Christ. And we're going to see as we study through this Olivet Discourse that it's all about the Great Tribulation, which is that little season, that period of time before the second coming of Jesus Christ on the last day. The last day is when Jesus comes back. It's Judgment Day. It's also the day of salvation for God's people. There's heavenly signs. And the last day ushers in eternity. But this Great Tribulation right before that has altogether to do with spiritual warfare, about deception in the church, which we already see today, of course. There's false Christs, there's false prophets, there's signs and wonders, very sinful activity. And the Great Tribulation is a tribulation on God's people because it's the persecution of those true people of God that are in the churches that are persecuted. Please consider subscribing to this channel. There's a little red button in the bottom right-hand corner. But let's go on and understand this overview of the Olivet Discourse. Okay, the background. The Mount of Olives is on the east side of Jerusalem. It has a significant view of Jerusalem. You can see the temple buildings that oversees the city. It's actually where Jesus spent his time, or his evenings, during that final week that called the Passion Week. And we see that in Luke chapter 21, verse 37, that he went there at night. And he says that the temple there, all those buildings, there's not one stone upon another that won't be thrown down. And even today, we don't actually see all the stones thrown down because the western wall, also known as the Wailing Wall, is still there. Matthew 24:3, as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came at him privately saying, tell us, when shall these things be? When will the temple be destroyed? What shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the world? And we see that this same Mount of Olives, which we're going to look at in more detail in upcoming videos, and in particular, the next video, we're going to look at the Mount of Olives, the spiritual significance of that, because it's very much in view in Zechariah 14. But before we go further, we want to remind ourselves, and in the Rock of Offense channel that you're watching right now, we spend a lot of time on prophecy. The order of events are very much confused today in the church. They're either not talked about at all, or when they do, they confuse things. The order of events is actually quite simple. You have a church age, and at the end of that church age, which we're already in, is the apostasy. And we've done a video on the apostasy now. It sets the stage for the Great Tribulation. And the Great Tribulation is known as that little season when Satan is loosed, the Antichrist comes on the scene, the church is in decline, it is Babylon. And then so we have the church age, the Great Tribulation, then there's the last day, which is the second coming of Jesus Christ, for both salvation and judgment. Then that ushers in the eternity of the new heavens and the new earth. We will do quite a few videos on this series, and I've put in the comments or the description section of this video several links that you can look at on our website to get a more background of prophecy. But for now, we're going to look and we're going to dig into this Mount of Olives prophecy. Okay, here's a chart that we have on our website. It shows pictorially the church age, the Great Tribulation, and eternity. It lists various events that happen. The transition from the church age into the Great Tribulation is when Satan is loosed in Revelation 20. The millennium is a type of the church age, and at the end of that, he's loose, and he goes out to deceive. The Antichrist, which is the man of sin, is revealed. He's powered by Satan, who is now loosed. The abomination is placed into the church, and Babylon rules the church, because it's all about worldliness and the worship of false gods and idols. So take it, if you'd like, the time to look at our website. There's a lot of information about prophecy. This chart is there as well. Even in the Mount of Olivet Discourse, we're warned about false prophecy. False prophecy, and there's false prophecy has been around for a long, long time. And the false prophecy, it has to do with some people just don't want to talk about prophecy, but the Bible is full of prophecy. Our very hope of salvation lies in prophecy, looking for that blessed day. Now we're going to look briefly here. There's what's called a preterist. It literally means that which is past. These are people that say that prophecy in the Bible is already done. The Mount of Olivet Discourse, the throwing down of the stones, the return of Christ is already done. That's what preterists believe. There's no prophecy. There's nothing really in the Bible that we look forward to. But that's not true. They believe the Olivet Discourse is fulfilled in AD 70 by the destruction of Jerusalem, but that western wall, that Wailing Wall, is still there. They want to literalize the words, but they don't take them literally. But it says not one stone upon another, and that one stone upon another has a spiritual meaning, which we're going to look at because it's the destruction of the church. It's not the physical temple that is in view prophetically, and we'll look at that on a future video. And there's various versions of preterists, but in general, preterists believe that prophecy is done. Then you have probably the most prevalent view of prophecy, premillennialism, which is actually absolutely a false gospel. It talks about a different salvation plan for national Israel. They think that national Israel is really the focus of God's attention. The restoration of Israel in 1948 is all prophetic, and it all has a meaning, and it's all what God is looking for, and they're going to be all saved. And that's not true, because it's a false gospel. It teaches a false way of salvation for Israel. But before all that, before any prophecy happens, all Christians will be raptured away. So really what's in the Olivet Discourse, they say, is not important, because we're not going to be here for it anyway. That's just complete false prophecy. It's all around us today. And we see in Matthew 24:24, which again, we'll look at this in more detail later, there shall arise false Christ and false prophets, and they're already out there today in large numbers. Okay, let's now look at an overview of what's the content of the Olivet Discourse. It's in the three, what's called synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. A lot of volume is given to it. Jesus, again, departs the temple. He's in the temple teaching during the day. He departs and goes to the Mount of Olives. He prophesies of the destruction. The disciples came and say, oh, look at all those wonderful buildings, the temple buildings. It's a beautiful view up there. And Jesus prophesies that it's all going to be destroyed. Not one stone left upon another. And that's not, the literal piece of that is actually not done yet. It'll be done on the last day, the day of the new heavens and the new earth. But it's got a spiritual meaning. Those stones represent something spiritually, and those temples represent something spiritually. And we're going to see that it's the church that's destroyed, and that happens in the Great Tribulation. The disciples have two questions. When will this happen? And what's the sign of you returning? And again, those preterists think that Christ already came back in AD 70. And that's just absolutely ludicrous and not true. Jesus warns of deception. A good part of the Olivet Discourse is warning us about false Christ and false prophecy. And very importantly, we're going to see that the Olivet Discourse has four parallel views. A repetition, which is very typical of Old Testament prophecy. It's very typical of what's in the book of Revelation. There's actually four parallel views of the Great Tribulation in the Olivet Discourse. And then at the end, the second coming of Jesus Christ comes with heavenly signs. The sun, the moon, the stars are darkened. They don't give their light. And then in Matthew 24 and 25, there's 10 parables. There's given parables about the types of the end time events. And we've already done a couple of those, but we're going to cover all that in this series. Okay, so now let's look a little bit more at the main focus here about the Jerusalem temple destruction. Let's read the verses. We'll just use Mark 13 as an example. As he went out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, Master or teacher, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here. Luke 21:5 has it a little differently. As some spake of the temple, how it was adorned with goodly stones and gifts. And again, we're going to look at all this in more detail in an upcoming video. Mark 13:2, and Jesus answered said, See thou these great buildings? There shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. Now that we're going to find out on future videos that the temple is symbolic of the church. It's symbolic of the corporate or the nominal church that we see today. And even today we see the church starting to disintegrate. The stones thrown down are the scattering of God's people because they're the living stones and they're persecuted. They're driven out of the churches. They're scattered. It's really a great tribulation of the church. Some people think about the Great Tribulation. They think it's like heavenly signs and earthly events and wars here and wars there and all that. And we're going to see all the spiritual meaning of that as we look through this series. But it's the Great Tribulation on the church. Okay, now, as I said a little bit previously, the Great Tribulation, there's four parallel views of this in the Olivet Discourse. We see the beginning of birth pains. It talks about wars, famine, pestilence, earthquakes, all with spiritual meanings. There's a persecution, but God's people witness through the persecution. There's an abomination of desolation, and then God's people flee to the mountains when they see that. When they see that in the holy place, which is a symbol for the church. And we've done videos on the abomination of desolation before, but it has altogether to do with worldliness in the church, which we already see today to a large degree. And of course, there's false teaching in the Great Tribulation. So all these things we're going to look at upcoming videos. And some people want to divide the Olivet Discourse and say some of it happened early and it happens all through the church age. No, it's really, the disciples remember asking about the end time. It's all about the end time, and it's all about the Great Tribulation and the last day. We see that last day in four parallel passages that we just looked at. There's those birth pains, which is a symbol. Birth pains are a symbol of Judgment Day. We'll see that very clearly in other passages. Again, we see the endure to the end. In the second of these four parallel passages, it's telling God's people to endure to the end, and your soul will be saved. Because we have salvation on the last day. The next one, except days shortened, no flesh saved, the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled, pointing to the end of time. And we see finally in the other passage where the carcass or the body of the eagles are gathered together. That's a reference to Judgment Day. And again, we're going to look at all these in upcoming videos. This is an overview. This video is an overview to give you a taste of what the Olivet Discourse is about. When we look at prophecy all through the Bible, whether it's Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Zechariah, the other minor prophets, Isaiah, etc., we keep coming back to this parallel views of prophecy. It's the same basic events that happen over and over, just in different, beautiful, intricate pictures and portraits for us. It's the same what we see in the Olivet Discourse. There's four repeating passages. And also we see that in the book of Revelation. And we've done an extensive study on the book of Revelation, 180 videos. And we looked in that series, which I'll tag a video on this slide, that there's 7 parallel passages in Revelation. And we have those broken down on our website too. But for example, we see 7 judgment days, if you will. It's in the 6th seal of Revelation. It's in Revelation 10 with the mighty angel and 7 thunders. It's the 2 witnesses where the kingdoms are given to Jesus Christ. The judgment day, Revelation 14, the 7 balls of judgment, Revelation 15, 16, the judgment on Babylon, and the great white throne judgment. There's 7 parallel passages in Revelation, and they beautifully work through the church age, the Great Tribulation, the last day. It's a very simple result in repeating patterns through the book of Revelation. And so many people get confused when they read the book of Revelation. They think it's one narrative from start to finish, and you go through and they get all confused. No, there's actually 7 parallel passages. And when you understand that, you can more easily understand the book of Revelation. Okay, the 7 key features of the Great Tribulation, which a lot of these we're going to look at in the series we're working on. And again, we've done work on this before, and we have a video on this, a whole series on this, which I'll tag. First of all, the features of the Great Tribulation is that from the world viewpoint, it looks normal. They're given and taken in marriage. It looks like everything goes on. It's a tribulation on the church, on God's true people that are being persecuted in the church because of worldliness. The Antichrist, also known as the man of sin, little horn, the beast, etc. Many places in the Bible, and again, we've done a whole series on the Antichrist. The abomination of desolation in the holy place. It's the worship of Satan through idolatry, which we already see in the church today. There's deception, a great feature of the Great Tribulation. There's iniquity, unrighteousness, lawlessness. We see that all around us already. There's persecution and disunity in the church. If you stand for the truth of the Bible, you're set on the side. They don't want that. And Babylon, which is false Christianity, is on display all through the Bible, but especially in the book of Revelation. Okay, so let's go back now. The Olivet Discourse we see is one of the defining passages in the Bible about the Great Tribulation. We see in Matthew 24, verse 21, "For then shall be great tribulation." Greek thlipsis, trouble, affliction, tribulation, but it's great, a great tribulation such as what's not since the beginning of the world, to this time, no, nor ever shall be. It's a tribulation on God's people. It's worse than what happened to Israel in the Old Testament, because God's people are so numerous today. We have millions of God's people out there, and they're all scattered in churches, and some are not in churches, and some are leaving, and some, they're in the church, but they're deceived. They're days of affliction, as it's called in Mark 13. Then they shall deliver you up to be afflicted. And again, that's that same Greek word, thlipsis. Great tribulation, affliction, it's all the same Greek word. They shall kill you, and that's kill spiritually, by the way. And some people think, oh, God's people are going to be martyred. Well, they are spiritually martyred, but not physically martyred necessarily. You should be hated of all nations for my name's sake. People hate Christianity, true Christianity, the true gospel of election and God's grace. People hate that doctrine. The churches hate that doctrine. So they're going to kill you, which Christians die daily when they're persecuted. We're crucified with Christ. We take up our cross. We die daily. Okay, so again, in the Olivet Discourse, we see that in the Great Tribulation, there's 4 features that are included in Great Tribulation. We're going to look at these on future videos, but you shall hear wars and rumors of wars. Those are not physical wars. We've always had physical wars, and in some ways today's more peaceful than it was years ago. You should hear of wars and rumors. Those are spiritual wars. They happen all the time, and they go invisible. The media doesn't cover that stuff. God's people in the church being persecuted and not allowed to participate. Be not troubled, these must come to pass, but the end is not yet, because it's part of the Great Tribulation. There shall be famines, the famine not of food, but it's of receiving the truth of the Bible. In Amos, there's a passage that talks about that. Pestilence of sin and iniquity. Earthquakes mean judgments. All type of evil things are happening in the churches. It's judgments on God's people that are unfair. Okay, just a quick look at some of these. The war, the spiritual battle. We see we're delivered, afflicted, we're killed, we're taken before councils, we're beat in synagogues, we're taken in front of the church leaders and accused of things. We're offended, families break up, they're arguing about the truth of the gospel, or most of them don't care. You're hated by all men for the name of Christ. If you preach the true gospel of God's election by grace, people hate that. And we fall by the edge of the sword, we're led away captive. All these things have to do with spiritual warfare, and again, we're going to look at these in future videos. Famine, lack of the truth of the word of God. False Christs come, they say they're Christ, the time is near. There's false prophets, there's signs and wonders. There's false teaching saying Christ has already returned. We're going to look at all that on future videos. There's pestilence, iniquity abounds, love becomes cold, the abomination, that wicked thing that causes desolation in the church, in the holy place. It's Satan's kingdom, the worldliness in church. The desolation is the fact that true Christians are being driven out. They're being replaced by unsaved leaders in the church, false Christs and false prophets. Jerusalem, which is a symbol for the church, is encompassed. There's great desolation. And ultimately, God's people, those who are in Judea, flee to the mountains. They're looking for spiritual truth. Earthquakes, judgment on the church. Judgment begins at the house of God. The temple stones are all thrown down. They're scattered. It's razed to the ground, it's called in Luke 19. Great tribulation, distress. They're the days of vengeance. God is a God that is a just and a holy God. Just a quick summary on this introductory video on the Olivet Discourse. There's a lot of material here, and we need to take it slow. We need to take it step by step. But once you understand it, it's a very simple message. The last days, the Great Tribulation, the second coming of Jesus Christ, not one stone upon another. It's the destruction of the temple, which is the nominal church. There's an extensive description of what the Great Tribulation will be like. We're going to be looking at that in upcoming YouTube videos. Please consider subscribing to this channel, and thank you very much for watching this video.